Her husband tried to sell her for a bottle of whiskey, until a Hells Angels rider claimed her hand. The night her life shattered began with the sound of gravel under tires and the smell of stale whiskey drifting through the cracked door of the trailer she no longer recognized as home. Sarah had felt fear before, fear that tightened her breath, fear that made her hands shake. But this was different. This was the kind of fear that seeps into bones and whispers that something irreversible is coming. When her husband stumbled inside, eyes wild, shirt stained with rage and failure, she knew the man she once trusted had disappeared long ago. What she didn't know was that before sunrise, he would try to trade her like property, and that a stranger on a roaring Harley would become the reason she survived. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the strength it takes to rise again, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. It helps the channel more than you know. It had been years since Sarah recognized the reflection in the mirror. Once she had been soft-spoken but full of life, a woman who loved books and rainstorms and believed that people could be better. Her husband, Mark, had once seemed better too, a man with charm, ambition, and promises that felt like sunlight. But as bills piled up and his patience thinned, the charm rotted into bitterness, the ambition sank into addiction, and the promises turned into fists, apologies, and more fists. Sarah had learned to shrink herself, to survive by silence until silence became a prison. On that night, Mark wasn't merely drunk, he was desperate. Money gone, job gone, dignity forgotten. He had gambled away the last scraps of their life, and when that still wasn't enough to quiet the storm inside him, he reached for the one thing he still controlled, her. Sarah watched, paralyzed, as he dragged her outside toward the clearing behind the bar where bikers gathered on weekends. The bonfires flickered like warning signs against the dusk. She could see the faces of men who lived hard and rode harder, leather jackets glowing orange under the firelight. She heard her husband shout something, waving a nearly empty whiskey bottle, laughing as if misery were a joke only he understood. She realized, with terror and disbelief, that he wasn't just showing off. He was trying to sell her. He was actually offering her to anyone who would hand him a full bottle and maybe some cash. Sarah felt humiliation burn hotter than the flames behind her. She wanted to scream, to run, to disappear, but her legs were trembling too badly to obey. The men around him laughed, shook their heads, muttered things she couldn't hear. Some looked away, some didn't. She felt like she was dissolving under 100 indifferent eyes. And then the sound came, a deep, powerful growl echoing across the dirt lot. A motorcycle rolled into view, black and chrome catching the dying light like a blade. The rider dismounted, slow and steady, boots crunching against gravel. He had the presence of a storm, quiet, heavy, impossible to ignore. His vest bore patches that marked him as a Hells Angels rider, but it was his eyes that struck her, intense, observant, and unexpectedly calm amid the chaos. He took in the scene, the drunken husband, the terrified woman, the crowd pretending not to care, and something in his jaw tightened. Sarah didn't know him, but for reasons she couldn't explain, she felt the first flicker of safety since the nightmare began. Mark swaggered toward him, slurring threats and bargains, waving Sarah's arm as though she were a cheap product. The rider just stared at him, unblinking, unbothered. When Mark shoved her and she stumbled, the rider stepped forward, steadying her with a hand that was firm but gentle. The touch made her gasp, not out of fear, but out of the shock of being handled with care for the first time in years. He didn't speak, not a word, but something in his stance made Mark falter, then sneer, then laugh nervously. The other bikers grew quiet. Even the fire seemed to dim as if waiting. The rider finally lifted his chin and looked Mark dead in the eyes, not with anger, but with a cold certainty that made Sarah's heartbeat settle. He didn't need threats. His silence alone made the message clear: this ends now. Mark's drunken courage evaporated, replaced with the ugly cowardice Sarah had seen so many times behind closed doors. He muttered curses, spit on the ground, grabbed his whiskey, and staggered away, yelling for no one in particular. And then, just like that, she was no longer his hostage. The rider turned to her, and for a moment the world softened. He looked at her not like she was broken, not like she was something to pity, but like she was someone still capable of standing again. Without asking, he walked her to his Harley, lifted a spare jacket from the seat, and draped it over her trembling shoulders. The weight of it felt like a shield, Sarah knew she could have refused, she could have run, but something in her finally gave in, not to fear but to hope. She climbed onto the bike behind him, gripping the worn leather as the engine roared to life. The ride was nothing short of freedom. Wind tore through her tangled hair, the night air washed the smoke from her lungs, and every mile put distance between her and the life she feared would end her. She didn't know where he was taking her, but she didn't feel afraid. He brought her to a safe house owned by the club, a place where women in crisis were protected, where no one asked questions until she was ready to speak. It was there, in the quiet warmth of a small, dimly lit room, that Sarah finally broke down, not in despair but in release. The riders stayed outside the door, not listening, not intruding, simply present. Days passed. She rested, she healed. The other riders treated her with a respect she hadn't felt in years, and the man who saved her, whose name she learned was Cole, became a constant, calm presence. He never pushed her, never pitied her. He simply offered space for her to rebuild herself piece by fragile piece. Healing wasn't quick. Trauma never is. But with each sunrise, Sarah felt her strength return. She began volunteering in the kitchen, then helping around the clubhouse, eventually laughing again. Small laughs at first, then real ones that echoed like miracles. Cole noticed, always from a distance, always with a quiet pride that warmed her. Months later, when she was strong enough to choose her own path again, she made a decision that surprised even her. She didn't leave. She chose a new life, a new family, and a man whose respect for her was deeper than anything she had known. And one cool morning, as sunlight spilled over the horizon and painted the motorcycles in gold, Cole reached for her hand, not to claim her, not to possess her, but to ask silently if she wanted to walk beside him. She squeezed his hand back, her answer soft but certain. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us bring more real, emotional stories to life.